Today I'll be talking about AP World Unit 8.1 to 8.3, the Cold War. Many of the stuff that I'll be talking about requires a video in and of its own right for more information outside of the AP test. And so I will link some more videos in the comments if anyone needs it. So let's get started. So first, what we have to do is we have to set the stage for the Cold War. So what we have is we have like three conferences during the war and right before the war ends and after the end of the war. So the first conference was in Tehran, which is now in modern day Iran. So basically that conference was just talking about who will invade where and who will take the territory. So the Allies agreed that the Soviet Union would focus on freeing Eastern Europe, while the Britain and the United States would concentrate on freeing Western Europe. And also, Britain and the United States agreed to shift some Polish territory to the Soviet Union, which would be offset by Poland gaining territory from Germany. And the next conference was the Yalta Conference. And the main theme of the Yalta Conference was what was going to happen after the war ended. And by then it was February 1945, and everyone knew that the war would end in the Allies' favor. It's just a matter of when. So they were just talking, the leaders, the big three, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, they were talking about what to do with the former territories that the Nazi Empire stole and invaded. So Franklin Roosevelt, he wanted free democratic elections in Eastern Europe, and he also wanted the Soviets to join the war in Japan. But Stalin demanded influence over Eastern Europe because he was fearful that another Napoleon or Hitler would invade Russia, so he could have Eastern Europe as a buffer zone. He also wanted control of islands claimed by Japan and ports ruled by China and part ownership of a Manchurian railroad. So by this time, Roosevelt thought that after years of war, the American public was not wanting to support another war and they were tired. So he said okay to this. And the conference ended with the Soviet pledge to fight Japan, but the Soviets offered only vague assurances on free elections in Eastern Europe. And the third conference, the Potsdam Conference. So this one had a new president, Harry Truman, who took over after President Roosevelt died due to old age. And I believe, old age. I'm not sure if it's another one. Yeah. So Churchill lost his position as prime minister mid-July and was replaced by Clement Attlee. And Truman insisted on free elections in Eastern Europe, but then Soviet troops had already occupied the region, and they refused Truman's demand. With the backing of Soviet power, communists in East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania took over, and they created a communist puppet government that basically was the Soviet government in all but name. So shifting power. So there was massive destruction in Europe, and you could see countries such as the Soviet Union, Poland, and Germany, they all lost around 10 to 20% of their population. And that's a lot of people. And countries such as Britain and France also maintained strong traditions such as democracy and the rule of law. And they also had strong educational systems, including universities. So these advantages provided the foundation for Western Europe to become a global leader. But due to the massive destruction and population loss, Europe became less influential and powerful while countries such as the United States and Soviet Union became more and more powerful. And so there's also new technologies. So the main technologies that you could see in the war was the atomic bomb, which a picture is shown here. I'm not sure what test this was. So and so atomic weapons basically changed war in and of itself. And you could basically destroy a city with just one bomb dropped. And it changed the entire scope of warfare in the modern age. And along with that, there was also the military-industrial complex, which was created during the World War II. So it was basically an informal alliance between the government and the large military defense contractors. Some examples of these are Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and like all the like. And basically the alliance between the two, they both gained power and they would sell weapons and systems in order to continue their military spending. And it's like kind of hard to explain, but yeah, that's pretty much it. All of this requires a video in and of its own right, so I'm just trying to just go over it pretty quick. So yeah, so the third major thing is the end of empires. So with the end of World War One, the demand for self-determination, that the idea that each country should choose its own form of government and leaders was spreading. And so the Suez Crisis in Indochina, so the Suez Crisis and Indochina were basically the main events that caused basically the end of the British and the French empires. So the Suez Crisis was in the 1950s, and it basically led to the British Empire pretty much being done, and it's the end of the age of British empires. And Indochina was basically a war between the French and the people in modern day Vietnam who wanted freedom. And I guess some people could say the war in Indochina was the start of the Vietnam War, as many American advisors were helping the French army fight. So, yeah. So now let's get into the actual stuff, the Cold War. So by 1945, Stalin and Truman recognized conflict. So so the thing is that the main reason why they did not like capitalism and the US and USSR did not get together was due to a few factors. So the first one was with capitalism and communism. So one difference between the United States and Soviet Union was like how they organize their economies. And so the United States, Western Europe, and other capitalist countries, economic assets such as farms and factories were owned privately. So private interests determined economic decisions. And in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and other communist countries such as China, economic assets were owned by the government. So the government basically had control over the means of production. And this system was meant to emphasize equality and fairness. However, in real life, what turned out was not equal or fair for the Soviet government. It did not work out that well. So along with that, Churchill, he had like a 1946 speech, and he said that an iron curtain had descended across the continent of Europe. And the Iron Curtain is used today to denote the split between Eastern and Western Europe. So the next thing is satellite countries. So the USSR wanted to make the governments of Eastern Europe as much like the Soviet government as possible. So they directed countries of Eastern Europe and countries that they took during World War II to develop 5-year economic plans in order to focus on developing industry and agriculture at the expense of consumer products. Along with this, they also banned all political parties other than any communist party. And these actions basically allowed the USSR to exploit Eastern European nations to support the USSR rather than going for their own interests. Along with this, world revolution. So beginning with the October Revolution of 1917, the Soviet Union viewed capitalism as a threat to its power. So this basically enhanced the concept of world revolution, in which was like a belief that organized workers would overthrow capitalism in all countries. So the Soviet Union tried to follow this plan by organizing and basically funding revolutions in countries such as Germany, Hungary, Bavaria, Italy, and Bulgaria. And along with this is also heightened Western suspicions of the Soviet Union. And along with this, you have containment, which basically was a policy of the United States to not let communism spread farther. And basically, it was pretty aggressive. Wherever the Soviet Union would go, the United States would also keep an eye on things and be there. And it would just be like a game of chess or tennis, I guess. So, yeah. And the next thing you have is the Marshall Plan. So the Marshall Plan, which was enacted in 1947, was designed to offer basically $12 billion of aid in order to all nations of Europe, including Germany. And this money would just be used to modernize industry, reduce trade barriers, and rebuild damaged infrastructure. So basically, this was also used in order to get Europe back on its feet and also to bring American influence into Europe, as we could get people, you could get government officials into the foreign governments by helping them. So they also thought that would be a very good PR campaign, and this was true with things such as the Berlin Airlift, where propaganda, well, not propaganda, I guess, yeah, propaganda or PR was used by the United States, and some pictures and were taken of American pilots throwing candy and other gifts to West German children. So the space and arms race. So the space race. So in the 1950s, the space race started, and in 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite called Sputnik into orbit around Earth, inaugurating what became the space race. And basically, this pretty much scared the American government a lot, and it led to the US government increasing a lot of things, including education and funding for military and space programs. This would also, along with this, you would have Yuri Gagarin being the first Soviet person on the moon. Sorry, not on the moon. I just can't speak today. Being the first Soviet person to go to space. And after this, you would have a space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, which was a race to put the first person on the moon. And this one, the United States won due to basically putting a lot of effort into building their rocket, the Saturn V, while the Soviet Union, they tried their best, but their rocket was frighteningly complicated. Like the N-1 rocket that they built had like 30 engines. And all in all, that like Soviet and American engineering, it was pretty impressive. And the hurdles that they did is pretty, that they had to overcome was pretty like challenging. So I'll try to link some more content from other YouTubers on that. Like it's pretty interesting stuff. So along with this, so you have the arms race, and this picture over here is of the ICBM being paraded over the streets of Moscow. And so mutually assured destruction, basically when someone starts a war, whichever country starts a war that's nuclear, all the countries and basically the whole world would be destroyed, and nuclear winter would start, and they'll be obliterated. Like there'll be basically nothing left. Since neither side could win such a nuclear war, no side had an incentive to start one. And as long as both sides kept improving their technology, the balance of terror between them would help keep the peace, which everyone hoped and thought of. So 8.3, effects of the Cold War. So let's first get started with East and West Germany. So up here, we have a picture of the Berlin Wall. So Germany was basically like the main area during the Cold War. Like you would see whatever happened during the Cold War, you would see it in Germany. There were both American, British, and French military bases or Russian military bases. Whatever happened, Germany would be the first one to get hit by it. So some examples of this was basically the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift in 1948, the Berlin Wall, and the Checkpoint Charlie standoff, of which I believe the picture of that is here, right over here in the bottom. So basically, whatever would happen, Germany was going to be the first one to feel its effects. Along with that, you would have NATO and the Warsaw Pact. So the NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed in April of 1949, and it pledged mutual support and cooperation within the alliance against conflicts and wars. And the Soviet Union, they had a response to that, which was the Warsaw Pact, which was created in 1955. So the Warsaw Pact was basically a combination of Eastern European countries along with the Soviet Union in order to combine their armed forces and base their army and military leaders in Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. And these nations were known as the Communist Bloc. So, and also along with this, you had proxy wars or wars that happened. So some examples of this are the Korean War, which was caused due to North Korea invading South Korea in an attempt to reunite the country under its leadership. And so the UN voted to support South Korea militarily. And the Soviet Union could have vetoed that resolution, but its representative was absent due to protesting and boycotting a meeting. And along with that, you would have the Vietnam War, which was another war fought in order to stop North Vietnam from capturing South Vietnam and putting communist government. And this picture over here is of two US soldiers watching over a burning building during a search and destroy operation. So, yeah. And so basically, the reason for the Vietnam War was due to the domino theory, which is basically like the idea if one country in the region became communist, other countries in the region would soon follow. So President Lyndon Johnson thought that if Vietnam fell, then Cambodia will fall, then Laos will fall, then Thailand, then Burma, then like then Bangladesh, and then yeah, it would go on and on until India, and then it would just be a domino fall. And so the U.S. government sent troops into Vietnam, and frankly, I'm just making it like as simple as I can because there's a lot more nuanced reasons. And another one, the Cuban Missile Crisis. This should have been before the Vietnam War, actually. So the Cuban Missile Crisis was due to the Soviet premier Nikita Khrushchev sending nuclear missiles to Cuba, which could hit Florida and the rest of the United States before a response could happen. And Khrushchev felt justified in his actions because the United States put nuclear missiles in Turkey, and that was very close to the Soviet Union. And along with that, the final one is the Soviet-Afghan War, which I'm just pulling up stuff. So Soviet-Afghan War was in the 80s. So that one basically happened due to the Soviet government invading Afghanistan to prop up the country's communist government against Muslim fighters. And basically the Soviets basically had a tough time in that situation. And so it was basically like the US war in Afghanistan. It was a guerrilla war with basically no way of winning. And the collapse of the Soviet Union occurred by the end of the war, and the Soviet army withdrew in 1989, which then caused a civil war in Afghanistan, which led to the Mujahideen, or the nowadays known as Taliban, to take over the country. And this war, what it did is it put stress on the USSR's economic system and left Soviet leadership vulnerable to reform. So the 70s. So the 70s basically not much happened. Like the 70s was mainly a period of peace with the end of the Vietnam War occurring, along with Detente, which was basically a relaxation of relations between the United States and Soviet Union, along with China and the United States. And one symbol of this detente was basically President Nixon and Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev signing the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, or SALT Treaty, which is designed to freeze up the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles that could be kept by the United States or Soviet Union. And sorry, so basically to play one power against the other, Nixon also visited China, and it was basically the only visit, actually not the only, the first visit between an American president in communist China. And basically it helped both the United States and the Soviet Union because the USSR was having a economic crisis. And the United States also was having crises due to the Vietnam War, along with economic tensions. So yeah, and detente basically ended by 1979 with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, where Jimmy Carter halted grain shipments to the Soviet Union, which was basically a symbol of detente, like the U.S. Sold excess stores of grain to the Soviet Union in order to help them also, but this stopped by 1979, which marked the end of detente. And so now we have the 80s, the most, frankly, dangerous point of the Cold War, and basically, um, like the most, well, ludicrously stupid point of the Cold War. So the 80s started off with both Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and President Ronald Reagan being elected into office. So Margaret Thatcher was known as the Iron Lady, and she was like basically extremely anti-communist, and she was, yeah, and Reagan was basically well, I guess you would know about Reagan, so like he was also anti-communist, and basically what they both did, and they they both basically stopped detente, and they put like a hardline stance against communism, trying to end it by the end of the 80s. So the first main thing you have to know is military exercises during the time. So there were a couple of exercises such as Able Archer and the Reforger exercises. So Able Archer was in 1983, and it basically simulated what will happen in the effect of a nuclear war. And this caused the Soviet Union to become extremely paranoid of the West starting a war, because they didn't know that it was actually an exercise, and they thought the West was actually preparing for invasion. And all of this led to almost nuclear wars starting, with some people, with one person, I'm not sure what's the exact event, but there was a person who did not launch a send the order to launch the nuclear weapons when it showed that there were American nuclear missiles approaching. So there was like nothing that happened like that, but it almost happened, and would have, well, I guess none of us would be alive if that happened. So you also had military exercises such as Able Archer, and this one, the picture over here, is of an American M60 main battle tank in West Germany, basically just driving along. And you also had more nuclear weapons. And so with this, you would have ICBMs, which were around since the 60s, but then they were basically upgraded and modernized in order to carry more nukes, more warheads. And this one is of an LGM-118 Peacekeeper missile, and it carried basically around 8 to 10 warheads. I'm not sure about the full specifications, and it could carry so much that just like a whole missile, just one of them could basically take out Moscow, Stalingrad, and other cities such as St. Petersburg in just with one missile. And you would have hundreds of these, so the whole world would be pretty much dead. And in order to combat this, Reagan created a system known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars. And basically, the system was going to use lasers and other extremely ludicrous systems in order to stop Soviet missiles from getting to the United States. And frankly, it never would have worked. Like, it was too expensive, and the technology was just basically people daydreaming of what they could do with this. It was basically science fiction. It could not have happened with the technology they had, unless they really thought outside the box. And although it was ludicrous, the Soviet Union didn't were paranoid, and they objected fiercely due to them thinking that the United States would be starting an arms race in space, and basically it basically, yeah. So I guess, and by the end of the Cold War, around 1986 to 1990, the Cold War started to thaw, and both the United States and Reagan, along with Russia and the new premier Gorbachev, they both decide to start to reform the Soviet Union. And by 1991, the Cold War had pretty much ended, with West Germany basically, Western and Eastern Germany basically became together and became one country again, and more reforms spread to other countries, with the Soviet Union ending in 1991. So I guess that's it with the Cold War. I will try to see what videos there are and like others to explain the whole thing, as I feel they could explain more of the smaller wars such as proxy wars and other initiatives such as Star Wars and the Vietnam War much better. So yeah, I guess that's it. So thank you and have a good day and stay safe.